Welcome to the CIDCI Online Salon Series. I'm Margie O'Driscoll, and on behalf of the CIDCI Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome you here today. CIDCI's mission is to accelerate innovation, disruption, and change to improve the built environment. We create networks that share knowledge, experience, and ideas through productive dialogue. CIDCI is a not-for-profit organization that relies on your financial support to provide these programs. Thank you to our sponsors who make all of this possible. Today, there's enormous suffering in many countries due to the pandemic, especially in India. But there is also an emerging feeling of hope in many places around the world. As COVID vaccination rates start to increase, a feeling of optimism is starting to emerge. Many of us are hugging elders we haven't seen for a year, or maybe attending a college graduation. Our lives are transforming into a new normal, an entry into a time that is simultaneously similar, yet very different than the world we left in February of 2020. As we re-enter workplaces, airports, and sports stadiums, we hope that some of the difficult lessons of the past year strengthen our resolve to build back better. At CIDCI, we're starting to plan our fall forum, which will be October 4 to 8. As much as we wish we could be with you in person for the day, we believe it's more prudent to do an online series. So we'll do what we did last year, 5 days of 90-minute early morning salons. These salons will feature innovative ideas with groundbreaking presentations and are designed to be shared widely with your colleagues. If you see something you want to share with a client or friend, feel free to direct them to the CIDCI website to hear recordings of these events. Okay, here's a bit of information about how today's session will work. We're recording this presentation and we'll place it on the CIDCI website as soon as possible. If you have questions or comments during the presentation, please use the chat box. Today's session will run for 60 minutes. Today, Danish professor Christian Thuesen will discuss design and construction in the circular economy. What can Denmark teach the United States about a more holistic approach to innovation? Christian is an associate professor in project and construction management at the Technical University of Denmark and has been a Fulbright scholar at UC Berkeley and Stanford. He has more than 20 years experience as a lecturer, researcher, and consultant in various engineering settings, including construction and IT. Christian joins us today from his home in Denmark. Welcome, Christian.
Hi, and yeah, good. I'm glad to be here, all the way from Denmark. Unfortunately, I'm not from in my home. I decided to go to the university because I wanted to make sure that I have enough bandwidth to make sure the message gets through, right? Yes, but fantastic. Do you want me to share my screen and start the presentation, Margie, right away? Okay, then we'll see. And please do, I think Margie already made a poll for you, so please make sure to answer the poll as soon as possible, because it's something that we will like to see right away, almost. So, okay. So, yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk. This is something that I've been working with for the last year. Over the last 2 years, I've been working with my colleagues from Professor Iris Tomerline from UC Berkeley and Michael Lepek from Stanford on the transformation of construction and kind of leveraging the emerging digital technologies to address the societal needs that we face. However, given the COVID pandemic, I had to cut my stay short in the US. So I traveled back to Denmark in March last year, and then I started to dive into the issues of circular economy, because I kind of felt this is an area where there's a lot to be developed in Denmark, and also that there is a dire need around the world on this particular topic. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. How can we approach design and construction in new ways within a circular economy? Or given that we have to move our society towards a circular economy, what does that require in terms of our changing practices for the different roles in the industry? the main part of the presentation is basically to outline this this challenge and give some specific examples of what we're doing in Denmark, and I'll try to connect it to an American context as we go along. But I expect you also to connect the dots as we go along, and please feel free to answer a lot of questions in the chat because I would very much love to have some kind of a dialogue in the sense that it is possible. So the first question I actually wanted to answer you is what part of the industry you actually represent, and I don't know if you have the polls, Margie. So what does the poll show? Who do we have in the audience?
So half the audience is contractors, and
Okay.
then 30% are architects and engineers. And we've got one client owner and then an other. I'm sorry,
Okay.
three others.
Okay, awesome. So so it is a heterogeneous group of people that we have here. So that's great. And we will get back to these roles later on because that will be the main focus on how these roles are changing or need to change in the light of a circular economy that we're looking into. So, but the topic of today is is actually illustrated in this picture here, this slide, in the sense that we are. It documents. It's a picture of the garbage cans outside or the containers outside in my home in Berkeley while I lived there, and here in Copenhagen. And I don't know how many containers you have in front of your home, but we have, as you can see, at least 6 in Denmark, and that is something that has really been taking off for the past 10 years. So we're doing a lot of sorting of our garbage and recycling of all the materials that we basically are throwing out in a sense. And I know you also do a lot of that, or you do some in America, but I've just been it struck me that we are doing much more in a Danish context than you are, and there might be various reasons for this. But that is my initial observation is that is a there is a difference between the two countries in that sense. Okay, so that is also the reason why we started to think about, so what can America actually learn from Denmark in this context? Because I think if you look at Denmark, it's a rather small country. We have 5 million inhabitants, and a little more than that. So I think it's maybe almost the same size as a part of the Bay Area, and we have fairly high living standards, and so in many ways we are comparable, but we also have a completely different regulatory system, and also some different cultural features, as you will discover, especially in terms of how we do policy. So let's explore what America can learn from Denmark. First, I want to give this really interesting case, and I want to give a couple of cases throughout the talk today. So this is a very famous piece of architecture developed by Bjarke Ingels, one of the most famous architects currently in Denmark, building all around the world, and he designed this Amager Resource Center, a waste incineration plant that is basically able to handle 1,000 tons of garbage every day, and can produce electricity to 30,000 homes, and district heated to around 70,000 homes. So this is a major piece of infrastructure that was developed 15 years ago, and it is placed on the most shallow part in Copenhagen. So Amager, which is a small island where the highest level above the sea is 3 meters, and this is called Amager Bakke, the hill of Amager, and it's featuring this ski slope. So the problem really is that this has been designed in a way that requires us to produce a lot of garbage that we can burn. However, what has been decided politically in the municipality of Copenhagen is that we want to recycle much more of our garbage, and thus we don't burn as much, and thus we have a residual amount of so we don't really use the capacity in this fantastic piece of equipment, and thus there's quite a lot of discussion whether we actually really need it. But at least now we have a ski slope in the center of Copenhagen, so we can use it for something. It's a really interesting case. There's both a positive and a negative illustration of this. You can just in the handout you'll get afterwards, you can just dive into the links here in the top if you want. So this is just one example of how we approach, or we try to approach the an increasing sustainable development in a Danish context. And sometimes we also make mistakes, and it is difficult, this transition that we're looking into. So this presentation I want to give today is I want to talk briefly about what is the societal needs for developing a circular economy. So why do we need to think about a circular economy in the first place in construction? Then I want to talk about, introduce the idea of circular economy. What is it actually, and the systemic challenge that it represents. And thus I want to dive more into how it influences the various parts of the industry. So what does this mean for policymakers? What does it mean for clients and owners? What does it mean for advisors, architects, engineers, contractors, and material suppliers? And I want to give some specific examples and cases for each of these roles. And finally, I want to talk about our new project that is coming up as an illustration of some of the research that we currently are doing together with the industry. So starting out, I think right now, as Margie also really nicely portrayed here, we are facing a crisis with the COVID pandemic, and that has been all over the place for the past 1.5 years, at least 1 year plus, and this is something that we still will be struggling with. However, there are some other major challenges that we need to address in the coming years, and these are the ones of specifically climate change. So we need to flatten the curves, not only for the COVID pandemic, but also in terms of our emissions generally. If we look at construction, I think we have identified 4 central needs that are pivotal for future construction practice. First of all, it is a climate need. So we need to reduce the greenhouse gases or the emissions to the lowest possible amount. So that's one core goal that we need to address. Another need is the resource need. So material scarcity, we need to be able to address this scarcity of materials, and we need to be able to handle the waste that we're producing. There's also a value need in construction. So we are constantly challenged in terms of the productivity development in construction and the like. I don't want to talk about this today, but I think this is a part of the agenda as well. And finally, there's also a social need. So there's a rising demand by professional communities and customers to do something about some of these challenges. Today, I specifically want to talk about the climate need and the resource need and what we can do about it. And the first question I want to ask here, and this is just a question for reflection. So considering our planet's capacity, what do you think your budget for CO2 emission is per year? So As a person on the planet of the Earth, how much CO2 are you allowed to emit if everyone should be allowed to emit the same amount? I think this is the first time I heard this question. I kind of, well, this is a new way of viewing it. It's like thinking about it as a bank account. You're only allowed to spend a certain amount of money, a certain amount of emissions. In Denmark, the average emissions from a person is 17 tons a year, metric tons a year. And I expect it to be the same in the US, maybe even more in the US. The actual, the threshold is actually 1 ton. So the current way of living in Denmark and the US is not sustainable in terms of the emission of CO2s that we do have currently. And I want to illustrate this is in with some of the recent research that is from some of the research that we're collaborating with. First of all, there's a group of researchers that has identified so what is the CO2 budget per capita, given that we want to fulfill the requirements from the Paris Agreement, and thus right now we have a CO2 budget per capita on around 7 or 8, as generally across the whole planet. But we need to go to lower that, and we need to lower that onto a level around 1 ton per year. So there are two publications here. One is looking specifically on the trajectory based on the Paris Accords, and the other one is just looking at so how much can we actually emit as individuals on the planet, given that we have 7 billion people on the planet currently, and what are the carrying capacity of the planet. So we need to get down to this 1 ton, maybe 1 or 2 tons, something like that. That is a major challenge. And that basically documents the CO2 challenge. The next challenge I want to talk about is the resource challenge. So and my question here that you can start reflecting upon is, okay, so how much waste is in society actually comes from construction? I don't know if you've thought of that, but think about all the waste that you produce as a society. How much do you think actually comes from construction? So the answer to that question is 30%, at least in Europe. So we are, as an industry, really, really important as producers of waste. So we're producing an enormous amount of waste in the industry, and this is documented here in these two studies. So there's this really, really nice visualization from National Geographic, and you can just press the link and go to the details. Which basically documents that construction consumes 40% of all materials that is produced, and then it produces 30% of the waste. So we are probably the single most important industry in terms of resource consumption, and this also is influential in terms of the CO2 emission, because if we look at the emissions in themselves, a lot of them actually comes from the production of materials. And here, construction actually represents 40% or almost 50% of the emissions that comes from materials. And the major reason for this is obviously we use a lot of concrete, and that is spending or is resulting in a lot of emissions. So. So construction is really a major player in terms of consuming resources. Another element that I think is interesting is is that the resources that we have on the planet, if you start thinking about it, so the only thing that is not scarce or is not finite is the sun that hits the planet all the time. But in terms of all the materials, there's only a certain amount of materials on the planet Earth, right? And there's actually been some studies in terms of what is the current what are the remaining resources that we actually have on the planet. And as you can see there, this is we're actually starting to look into a society where the resources get scarce in terms of the availability of them in various ways. We see that in semiconductors, we see that in solar panels, but we also see it in construction. And I think and this was even before the COVID pandemic. And what we also see right now in Denmark and also here from the Financial Times is that the prices of materials is increasing. So whenever we have to have virgin materials into our buildings, whatever, we have to pay more for it. So resources are scarce, and they are also more expensive, or they get more expensive. And I think this is basically a core challenge for the construction industry. How can we do something about this? But before we can dive into this challenge, I think if you think about what construction really is, so we are literally we have been building the society as it is, with all the infrastructure, the buildings, the highways, whatever. And the way we've built it is we have taken materials and then produced something with it. And then after we produced it, we produce buildings, whatever. And some of this is then wasted afterwards. We're producing waste, we're demolishing it and moving it away. And the way we built this is we built this in this short-term linear projects based on a fragmented supply and value chain. So there's hardly anyone who really has control of the whole value chain. And it's literally based on what we term a take, make, waste paradigm. So we are taking materials, we are producing something with the materials, and then we're wasting them afterwards. And I think if we look at what we do in construction, we have not been very interested in what happened after the building were demolished and the infrastructure was demolished. It was just, it magically disappeared. But the point here is that all this stuff that is disappearing, that is actually something that is that has a residual value, and that has also environmental consequences. So maybe we should actually start thinking about that waste. And this is basically the idea of the circular economy. So how can we close the loop? So how can we make sure that it's not a one-way street in terms of the value chain? How can we reverse the value chain? How can we recircular the materials? So after we have the production, the building process, the use phase, the end of life, how can we, instead of just having all the materials ending up at landfills, how can we make sure that we are recycling the materials into the industry again? And in order to, this is a very nice graph, and it just basically documents how we would like it to be. The challenge really is, it is not as simple as that. And the reason for this is because whenever we have some waste, we have different quality of waste. We can do different stuff with waste. There's the possibility to reduce the amount of waste we have. We can reuse the waste, we can recycle, we can recover, and we can dispose. And the point here is that we would like, in order to maintain the highest value of the materials, we want to recycle at the highest possible level. So we want the least amount of materials to actually be disposed. And that's the idea of this waste hierarchies. I'll get back to this a bit later, because this is a major challenge. Okay, so now I actually want to make another poll, Margie, because I would like to know, so who is in the AC industry can contribute the most to moving the needle towards circularity? So what are the roles that can actually make the most difference here?
So I've put that in the chat box because I think it would be interesting for people to add a word as to why.
Okay. That's
So,
also a
and
good idea.
the poll feature on Zoom doesn't allow me to get that feedback from people, but I think it would be interesting to see why you think one particular group over another.
Yeah. So think about, so who would actually be the most influential in actually driving this agenda? Yeah. So Laura, yeah, owners, they initiate the demand. Yes, absolutely. Owners, 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 owners.
Could that be because we don't have so many owners on the call? I'm just saying.
So I wonder well, what would the owner say? Policymakers, it trickles down from the top. Yeah. Former owner here. Yeah. Awesome. Material suppliers. Yes. Fantastic. I think you're definitely onto something here, and I think so. We cannot do this without the owners. But again, whenever you need to build something, you need to make sure that there is someone who can do this. So it's always this kind of intricate balance between the supply side and the demand side, right? So obviously there needs to be a market, but sometimes some of the but the market can also be shaped in various ways. So let's have a look at how this can be done. So thanks for all the comments so far, and keep the questions coming. Then Margie will will remind me of some as we go along. Okay, so the idea here is, given that we want to move the construction industry into a circular economy, what kind of implications does it have for the construction businesses and the central actors in the industry? And I think, just as documented in your chat, so it is somehow a balance between the clients and builders, in the sense that the client, the one who is kind of requiring the buildings, and the supply chain, the ones that supplies it, need somehow to be aligned in terms of what are the priorities and what are the and their capabilities. So can they actually deliver what the clients want, right? And I think there's several elements that is essential here. And one of them is that working with circular economy really requires a long-term focus. We need to understand the way we build in a different way, and we need to acknowledge that the buildings that we build, they are literally standing for hundreds of years, right? So we need to have a different focus, and I think that challenges the very short-term oriented industry. So that's one thing, and the other thing is that it also requires us to be able to qualify and quantify the impact of the projects that we do. I think to a very large degree we can do this on an economical sense. So that's whatever we try to do whenever we try to make a budget for how much a project will cost. But we need to be much better in actually qualifying and quantifying the environmental and also the social impact of the projects that we do in a long-term perspective. And this has implication for the way we collaborate, the way we design, the way we plan, construct, and production, and demolishing. And in order to illustrate how this change might happen, I think I've been very much inspired in some of my recent work on business models and how business models change in construction. And in general, so there are different business model frameworks around. Christensen, the founder of the disruptive innovation phenomenon, he has been coining this idea about we can understand a business in terms of what are the priorities. So what they want to achieve, and the capabilities is what is it that enables them to achieve that. So and this is the framework that I basically want to work with. So I'm just looking at the priorities. So what is the orientation of the company, and the capabilities in terms of, okay, so what type of resource and processes does the company need to work with in order to get to where it wants. Let's start with the top. So what's the role of the policymakers? And I just wonder, I'm sure you know this, but what is President Biden's pledge to reduce CO2 emissions by 2030? I'm sure you know this. The answer is 50%. Isn't that right, Margie?
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but I think that's how that sounds correct.
So this is just and I know you had a different precedent a year ago, and this has changed dramatically. And we just welcome you back in the international community in that sense, because we have been missing you. If we want to understand the policy dimension, I think in a Danish context, we have to start with the Paris Agreement in 2015. Right now, we look at, and then this is kind of, this is further addressed in policy initiatives at European level and in the Danish level. And at the European level, we now have a reduction target by 55%, and they have developed a circular economy action plan for cleaner and more competitive Europe. So this is actually part of the European initiatives, and that's on the general European level. And then we have a very specific initiative that is called European Framework for Sustainable Buildings, where they are pushing standardization and requirements in terms of how should new buildings be constructed, and also in terms of refurbishment. So a lot of stuff is happening on the European level, but a lot of stuff is also happening at the national level here in Denmark. And in 2020, our government, and I think it's probably around 90% of our government, they signed a CO2 reduction target on 70% by 2030. So I think we are the most ambitious country on the planet as we speak. Yeah, and we have been doing this for quite some years, so I think there's also a reason why we are where we are. The Danish government has also pushed forward a strategy on circular economy, and here in relation to construction, there's two central elements that in this standard, in this initiative. One is the idea of selective demolition. So we should be much better at tearing buildings apart in the right way, so we can reuse materials in the best possible. And then we have the climate law, and so that's the selective demolition. Then the voluntary sustainability standard is another one, where that basically allows companies and owners to similar to what you could know from green building councils, but it's just on a national level. We also have a green building council, but we now have a non-proprietary standard for it. And we have a planned regulation, and then we have the voluntary standard. And what is interesting is that this standard is actually, these standards of the planned regulation and the voluntary standards is setting threshold in terms of how much carbon do we allow, embodied carbon, do we allow per square meter that we construct of new buildings. So we are putting measures in terms of how much CO2 we allow to embed in the buildings today. So it's not just about the consumption of the energy that the buildings have afterwards. It is actually the embedded CO2 in the actual materials. And this has actually worked very well early on when we look at in terms of reducing emissions from energy consumption, because we knew exactly over the next 5 years, we know we have to improve in a certain rate. And one of the reasons why we have been able to do this, I think, is because we have this feature in Denmark where there's a lot of collaboration between the industry on one hand and the government on the other side. So, and that is illustrated in the climate partnerships illustrated here on the top, where we have the Danish Prime Minister and a lot of the central players in Denmark, pension fund, directors from the biggest companies, industry associations, and the like, right? And they all team up in order to come up with a solution of how can we do this together? How can we move this agenda together? And based on this, there will be regulation that enforces certain practices in the industry, and then the industry follows as well. So this is something that we've done before, and we hope that this is going to be a major driver for the transformation as we go along. Okay, let's have a look at the clients and the owners. So, and the question here is, so how much CO2 emission can you actually save by refurbishing a building compared to constructing a new one? So if you're just standing in front of a building, maybe a building from the 70s, so you have to tear that all down and then build up something new with similar features. What would the cost of the CO2 emission, what will the consequences in terms of CO2 emissions be if you just refurbish the existing one and you construct a new one? It's maybe a difficult question to answer because there's a lot of parameters that is important to consider here. But a case study from Denmark shows that it's 50 times less CO2 emissions in renovations. So if you're refurbishing your building, you're much better off in terms of CO2 emissions than if you are just tearing it down and building something up again. So renovations becomes much more important. And if we look at this, that it means that as a client, it has consequences for the priorities. We need to be much more focused on refurbishment of the existing building stock. It doesn't mean that we're not allowed to build anything new, but refurbishment of the existing buildings is going to be a major thing in the future. But that also requires new capabilities. We need to be much more professional in the way we do facilities management. We need to think about how we tender practice for circular solutions. We need to think about the way we put requirements in terms of future buildings. So can they be flexible, or how can we make sure they're flexible so we don't need to tear them down again in the future if we want to use it for something else? And then make sure that whenever we are someone's building for us, that it can be disassembled, it can be repaired, and it can be maintained. And as an illustration of this, we've had a rather big innovation partnership in the Danish industry with a lot of the major companies and the universities in terms of renovating buildings sustainable. And there's a lot of features within this project. One of the initiatives was the development of industrialized facade element where you can refurbish these houses from the 60s and 70s without having the tenants moving out from them. And it was featured by the fast companies this spring. So this is just one of the initiatives, because we do have a lot of social housing from the 60s and 70s that needs to be refurbished right now. Okay, so what is the role of the advisors, the architects and engineers? And here the question is, so what is the global warming potential for steel and cross-laminated timber? I know this is both elements that are extremely important in the US. Yes, so it is obviously different. So the global warming potential for steel is way higher than, so it's positive. So whenever you're using steel, you are contributing to the emission of greenhouse gases. But if you are using glue laminated timber, you're actually not contributing to the greenhouse gases because the CO2 is embedded in the material. So and in that sense, it is much better to use cross-laminated timber compared to steel. However, that requires, or that builds on the assumption that you're not burning that material or the wood afterwards. So if you're taking the building apart in 50 years, you need to make sure you're not just burning that material, because then it just turned into a zero The choice of materials is extremely important in terms of how you design your buildings, and in order to address this. And again, in terms of priorities for engineers and architects, again, we need to focus on from new build to refurbishment, and we can do this in many different ways. One example is, for instance, in this case from 3XN, one of our partner companies, an architect, the Quad Tower in Sydney, where they are basically designing a skyscraper. That is where the design incorporates 2/3 of an existing structure of a building. You can do this in many different ways. And in terms of the capabilities, that is all about resource surveying. So identifying what type of resources are actually present in a building, design for disassembly, material selection, LCC, life cycle cost, and life cycle assessment is obviously important. Here's specifically a really nice feature from our from Denmark, with this, which is the material pyramid. You probably know the food pyramid from the 80s. So a couple of years ago, they developed one for building materials. So the basic idea is that you only want to use the materials on the bottom of the pyramid because they are the ones that is having the least amount of emission. Have a look at this. This is one of the resources that is available. Let's have a look at the contractors. Okay. So the question here is, so how much of the materials that a contractor buy could come from recycled materials? So think about contractors, they buy an enormous amount of material. And how much of this material can actually come from recycled materials? The answer to this question is approximately 30% under the current circumstance, because it's not like whenever you are demolishing a building, it's not like you can just use all the parts of that building, because there might be toxic substances in some of the buildings that were built from the past. So it's not like we can use everything that we have available, right? So and a recent evaluation or study that is actually done by for some of my students actually identified that it's just approximately 30% under the current circumstances. We might change that afterwards. Okay. Contractors, the priorities is obviously also focusing on refurbishment. And again, a lot of contractors in Denmark is actually focused on new construction, but the ones that is really running with a lot of the projects right now in Denmark is actually the one that is also having a very strong emphasis on refurbishment. And and as a contractor, the point here is that you want the capabilities. You want to make sure that you can source the materials, you can and you can source the secondary materials. You're able to handle the secondary materials. You can work with the recyclability of the materials, so you can make sure whenever you're taking the buildings down, that they can be recycled at the highest possible level. And then another feature that I think is really, really interesting, if you start thinking about the resource side from a contractor perspective, traditionally the contractor perspective has been very much focusing on handling human resource in order to do the projects. But now we're actually looking into a situation where the contractors should actually also look about the availability of materials. And whenever they're refurbishing a project, maybe that also represents a source of materials for other projects. So across the portfolio that they actually do as a contractor, they might actually maybe make an offer on a project that maybe doesn't make economical sense from a human side, but it makes a lot of sense from the material side. So it creates another layer of complexity to the contractor side that I think is really going to be interesting. There's the other elements that is interesting here, and that is, for instance, who's responsible for the risk associated with it. The case I have been put forward here is a really interesting phenomenon that is developing in Denmark and the UK over the last couple of years, and that is strategic partnerships. And the idea of the strategic partnership is that as a public client, you can tender out not just one project, but a whole portfolio project. And this has been initiatives within this skyrocketed in the last couple of years in Denmark. So now we have contracts with several billions of US dollars based on portfolios of projects, where the same team is doing multiple projects, and thus they get a specialization that is way higher than that what we see in normal projects. I want to mention this material atlas here, which is a very it's an important feature in Denmark. So whenever you want to recycle something, this atlas gives you information about if a building is constructed from a certain period, and they probably consist of this materials, and thus the different materials will probably have different type of substances, and then they basically evaluate, so what is the recyclability of this material? So can we actually reuse this material, or should we actually dispose it because it might have toxic substances? And we have a huge database for this. Finally, I want to talk about the material suppliers. So the question here is, how much of the current waste actually comes from construction is currently recycled? So, and then recall the waste hierarchy. So the recyclers that want to recycle at the highest possible level. So you use it to something that it was used that was very close to its original purpose. So if, for instance, concrete. So how much of the current waste is currently recycled? It's actually not that much. It's less than 5%. And that's because it is just recovered. So a lot of the concrete that is of the concrete waste is crushed down and then used for not landfill, but for road fillings. So the material suppliers is I've taken this case here. First of all, we have the traditional material suppliers. They need to obviously integrate secondary materials in the production of new materials. But the primary case here is I want to focus on a new business that we haven't really looked upon in the industry as of today, and that is the waste handler. Because the waste handlers, they are literally having access to a ton of materials. And they have to move away from being just a handler of waste to the supply of secondary materials. But this also requires a huge transformation on their side. This is basically that they need to reverse the supply chain, and they need to work with different type of production planning. So pull-based planning instead of just push-based planning that they have used so far. And they need to be working much more consistent with different levels of materials. And there's a very good case on this where they use concrete as a circular resource in Denmark. So this company that is RGS Nordic, they receive 300,000 tons of demolished concrete every year. And I just did the numbers yesterday, and 300,000 tons, that is twice the, it is twice the size of the Salesforce Tower and half of the Golden Gate Bridge. So it's quite a lot of material that they receive every year. So, and if we can increase the reusability of this material, we are far better off. Okay, time is flying, Margie. I don't know if, so I wanted to talk briefly about our own project here towards the end. So, but because what we want to do, but I think we also like to have some questions. So I want to briefly talk about our own project, and then we can take a few questions.
Very quickly.
Very quickly. Yes. Okay. So what we actually try to do now is actually we try to connect the partners of the industry in what we term platforms of circular construction, and the idea is that we want to create platforms around the materials, existing buildings, primary buildings, and secondary buildings. And our purpose is to accelerate the transformation of the construction sector towards the circular construction circularity based on these platforms. And the reason why we use platforms is because we think that we know from the other industries, and I think you're actually very far ahead in America on this agenda, is that that platforms are very good actually managing complexity, and thus that's a key feature for the requirement for addressing this circularity challenge. And it's also an efficient way to establish learning practices, to learn from project to project, and finally, it's also scalable. So this is our idea for the future and there are a couple of more slides that dives into the specific ideas. I want to I don't want to go too much into detail with this, but the general ambition is that based on the on systematically developing platform for circular construction, we will be able to make a substantial impact in the future in terms of the climate, resource value, and social needs of construction. So that's it. Yes, I wonder if there's a few questions.
Yeah, so Monica asks about who administers the material atlas. Is it specific only to Denmark, or is it through the EU? How is that? And is it a matrix other countries could absorb? You might want to stop. Well, actually, keep the screen sharing up for a little while, perhaps,
Yes.
and then we'll get back to just looking at you. Okay.
So should I just stop the screen?
Sure, that's good.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I think it's that's a good question. So the material atlas that we have here in Denmark is developed in Denmark, but I know there's a lot of development going on at the European level to establish a common database across the European countries. And there are so many initiatives on the circular agenda in Denmark and Europe. So I think I've just been able to just portray a few of them here in the presentation today. But there are a ton of other activities as well. Also, an element that I really haven't covered is the city level, which is another major area. So yes, but there is a link to this material atlas, but the problem with that link is that the link is fine, but the material atlas is Danish right now. I'll try to see if I can find an English version of it, but the rest of the link should actually be linking directly to English-based resources. Yes.
Great. So Zig Rubel, who's a CIDCI board member, asks, if 40% of materials, if 40% of materials are for buildings, and buildings are 30% of our waste, do we know what percentage of the materials created actually go into the building to understand our effectiveness of needing the materials?
Actually, that's a good question. Whenever I read this, I started studying this, I kind of felt, so why is this discrepancy between the waste ratio and the consumption of materials? But that's also, I think, because a lot of the stuff that we produce, they're literally standing, right? So it will not be waste anytime soon. Maybe 100 years from now, the buildings that we produce today will turn into waste. And that's why because we are constantly adding more buildings, more infrastructures, and we will so in the years to come as well. And that's why there's a discrepancy between those two numbers, I think.
So one of the reasons I was so excited to have you come and do a salon for CIDCI is that you actually have a pretty rigorous understanding of what we do and don't do here in the United States based on, your time, especially most recently at Berkeley. That's how we met. And I'm wondering if you were talking to our community and giving advice, where would you say we in the Bay Area can begin to make the changes which are necessary to happen? So this is completely your opinion that we're looking for here, based on perhaps more understanding of both societies, if you will, and the limitations of the American form of government, et cetera, towards moving towards a more holistic view of the circular economy.
So I think what really struck me when I was there, is just the ingenuity, the creativity that exists in your community. That's just amazing. And I think that is a requirement for making this transition happen. But I think one of the shortcomings that you have, and I talked to a professor at UC Berkeley, Robert Strand, on this, and they basically say, well, America is, well, we're not very good in thinking in shared systems. So systems that are developed for the collective, for collective purpose. And I think, I think that struck me right away. So that's what it is, because it's and I think if you start thinking about it, because we do have a lot of these shared infrastructure in Denmark. So pipes, gas pipes, electricity grids, you name, and that is railroads. That and all of this is basically a shared infrastructure, and it's owned by the government, right? And then we have private companies that runs on this, right? So the telecommunication or the electrical grid that is owned by the government, and then you have all the producers of electricity that then feeds into the system. So we have this balance between a strong government and then a free competitive market. And I think I don't know how you don't have the same practice of establishing these shared infrastructures. And it came very clear to me when if you want to try to take public transportation, and I recall then you have the public transportation in the Bay Area, and then you have all these buses that is driving people around from the different big tech companies. So it's like, why do Google, Facebook, why do they have almost their own type of bus services? Why is that not a shared service in the whole Bay Area, right? We don't have that in Denmark, right? And I think there's a reason why that's the case.
Interesting. Okay, so our last question is a really quick one, and it goes back to one of your first slides, but it's actually one of those burning, annoying issues that many of us have, which was your first slide that showed all the different trash cans or disposal
Yes.
cans. What goes in each of those? Like, how do you have so many?
So we have biodegradable substances. So we have plastic, we have metal, we have cardboard, we have garden stuff, we have and then we have toxic elements as well, and then we have the residual as well. So I think we have around 6 or 7 if we counted all of them, and then if we can then go to the places where we can get away with all of this, we actually have to sort almost everything. And that's why we don't have so much to burn anymore.
That's great. Tristan, I hope that helps you solve your problems with your HOA. Anyway, Christian, I really want to thank you for just an inspiring conversation for all of us. We have so much to learn from Denmark, and we just can't thank you enough for sharing your perspective on both of us and where there might be the middle path especially for the US. So thank you so much. If anyone on the call would like to follow up with Christian, his information's there. You can reach out to me and I can connect you in real time.
Yes.
So
and I think
go ahead.
Yes. I also want to thank you for inviting again, Margie. It was a really nice chat and presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. You can get access to the slides and all the stuff in there. So and feel free to reach out to me. And then looking forward to go on the shared path towards a circular future.
Great. Thank you again. This concludes CIDCI's online salon. The session will be recorded and placed on the CIDCI website on Monday. To join us for future webinars, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter on our website at cidci.org. Our next salon will be on May 20 and features Meredith Benaziak and Romano Nickerson discussing How might we design a project as a catalyst for transformation? Special thanks to Monica's Whistler for keeping us on track, and especially to Christian for a wonderful presentation. Hope you get to go have a glass of wine now. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And if you have any thoughts or comments, please reach out to us via CIDCI's website in the Contact Us link. All right. Have a great day, everyone, or evening.
Bye.